psychological things. Fans of classic film noir from the 1940s and 50s probably remember the actresses Lauren Bacall, Barbara Stanwyck, maybe even Veronica Lake. But do you remember Lizabeth Scott? She was the ultimate cinema siren of the 1940s, a sultry blonde with ice in her eyes and a handgun in her purse. Over the course of her career, Lizabeth starred in 22 films with such legendary actors as Humphrey Bogart, Burt Lancaster, and Robert Mitchum. But by the 1960s, she had all but disappeared from the screen. Our special guest, Todd Hughes, a mega fan of Lizabeth Scott's, was lucky and persistent enough to meet and befriend his idol in the 1990s. The two of them formed a unique bond that spanned 20 years, lasting until Lizabeth's death in 2015 at the age of 93. Todd has written the memoir Lunch with Lizabeth about his personal friendship with Miss Scott. As one of the last vestiges of Hollywood's golden age, Lizabeth revealed to Todd her warm personality and zest for life while shedding insight into her brief but fabulous career as an international film star, recording artist, and mistress to one of Hollywood's biggest producers. Although they didn't always see eye to eye on such topics as homosexuality, art, and politics, Todd and Lizabeth always managed to find their way back to an enduring fondness. A former executive at the American Film Institute, Todd has made 16 short underground and art films. He directed the indie feature The New Women, starring Mary Woronov, and was a staff writer for the primetime series Wicked Wicked Games, starring Tatum O'Neal. Todd and his husband, P. David Ebersole, have made 5 feature documentaries together, including Dear Mom, Love Share, Mansfield 6667, and House of Cardin. They also executive produced the critically acclaimed film Room 237, as well as Alaska is a Drag for Netflix. We are very happy to have Todd here today to discuss Lunch with Lizabeth with librarian Stella Mittelbach of our Central Library's Science and Technology Department. Welcome, both of you. Hope you enjoy it.
Thanks, Krista. I'm Stella Mittelbach, coming to you out of the recording studio of the Octavia Lab at Central Library. We would like to take this opportunity to recognize and acknowledge the first people of this land, honor their elders, past and present, as well as their descendants, who are citizens of these nations. For more information on which territory you may reside on, check out nativeland.ca. That's native-land.ca. I'd also like to thank the LA Made Fund. Because of them, we have 5 copies of Lunch with Lizabeth to give away later in the program. So please stay tuned for more information on that. I'd now like to welcome Todd Hughes.
Hello.
Hi, Todd Hughes. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be at our wonderful Los Angeles Public Library.
As well. So we're going to discuss Lunch with Lizabeth. This book is a very fun read about your friendship with Lizabeth Scott, her life, her films, and your own journey from fan to filmmaker. Now, to start with, for those in the audience who haven't read the book yet, could you talk about your beginnings as a lover of film?
Sure. I mean, almost since the beginning of my memory, I'm old enough. When I was a child, we had the black and white TV. This was a long time ago. But I remember, we were supposed to watch Sesame Street and the Electric Company, but I was always flipping the channel looking for, a Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movie. I remember seeing one of those and just being blown away. And funny enough, one of my earliest memories of television and movies was I saw this beautiful blonde in this movie, long blonde hair, and it was a World War II movie. And in it, she's a nurse and she's with these other nurses and they're surrounded by the enemy. And she says, okay, I'll take care of this. And she puts on this beautiful nightie that she's been carrying with her, slips a hand grenade in her cleavage and goes out and they all jump on her and she blows up.
Wow.
And later I found out it was Veronica Lake.
Oh.
So it definitely molded, I think, what became my type. because he's very similar to Lizabeth Scott. But then, you know, growing up, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have video stores. So I would just comb the TV guide every time it came out looking for, you know, I'd read about someone like Esther Williams, and I was like, oh, I've got to see an Esther Williams film or a Sonia Henney film, which I don't think I ever saw till I was an adult. And then when I got into high school, junior high school, I started making films, and I made quite a few films with my friend Tim Kirk, who I'm actually live from his office today. And then when I went to Columbia in New York City, I started studying film, taking film classes with people like Andrew Saris of the Village Voice, and he's the man who actually introduced film noir to America as a concept. And then I went to Paris for my semester abroad, and in Paris they show movies, American movies. They have like 30 repertory theaters, and they release old films like regular films, so they come out on Friday and play for a week. But it was in Paris in 1984 that I first saw Lizabeth Scott on a movie screen, and I couldn't believe she had eluded me because I thought I was quite a student of cinema. But that's where my obsession with her began.
Tell us a little bit more about that, or yeah, and then maybe you could read a little bit from the book for us, maybe the West Hollywood chapter and the Musso and Frank's part.
Yes, I'd be delighted. Well, so I saw her in the film Dead Reckoning with Humphrey Bogart, and she just swept me off my feet. I fell in love with her. And then I went home and looked in the Film Goer's Companion, and they had a very brief, dismissive, basically calling her like a second-rate Lauren Bacall. And I was looking, you know, cross-referencing her titles, and I was like, oh my God, she worked not only with Humphrey Bogart, but with Robert Mitchum, Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Charlton Heston, Lucille Ball, Barbara Stanwyck. I mean, it's just all the greatest people in Hollywood. And so then I was kind of on the scavenger hunt trying to find out information about her. And then I was in New York, and this guy came over to my apartment, a friend of a friend, and I had a picture of her on the wall. And most people would say, oh, it's Lauren Bacall. And I was like, no, it's Lizabeth Scott. But this guy came in and he said, oh, Lizabeth Scott. And I was like, oh, you recognize her? He's like, I know her. I teach her aerobic dance in LA. I was like, wow, she's alive. And I read in a book called The Paramount Pretties by James Robert Parrish that this was in the 70s, that she lived in an apartment on the residential section of Hollywood Boulevard. So by 1986, I had moved to Hollywood. And not long thereafter, I was walking up and down the residential part of Hollywood Boulevard, and I'll read the chapter about how I actually found out where she was. But
Great.
That's to set it up a little bit.
Cool.
All right. My apartment in West Hollywood was very tiny. It was right up the street from the popular restaurant called Border Grill on super happening Melrose Avenue, where I was experiencing the height of my career in the FBI, the food and beverage industry. I had not made any inroads to Hollywood, but I had served tacos to some of Hollywood's biggest names. My first day, I peddled swordfish tacos to Jane Fonda and her daughter, Vanessa Vadim. I was an excellent waiter and was getting accustomed to serving people like Cher, David Bowie, and Catherine Deneuve with complete composure. The only celebrities I ever got nervous around were people like Julie Newmar and Larry Hagman, because I really couldn't reconcile myself with the fact that I was actually exchanging words with Catwoman or Major Nelson. I just stared at Andy Williams when he asked me if the chili relleno was spicy, and I was cool and wouldn't blink an eye if OJ and Nicole didn't touch their food as they took turns doing blow in the unisex bathroom. Even when their comida went directly to the dumpster, they always tipped like stars. I did make inroads of another sort when I started to walk up and down the far end of Hollywood Boulevard, where all the apartment buildings were, searching for either a green Jaguar in the parking lot or the name Scott on the mailbox. I never saw a Jaguar. I did see lots of Ford Escorts and Honda Civics. Now that I was there in person, it seemed to me that an apartment on Hollywood Boulevard was a modest place for a movie star to reside. Lauren Bacall was hawking coffee and cat food on TV for the payday, and Veronica Lake had died 20 years ago, penniless and alcoholic. It had been many years since Lizabeth had been a working actress, and although not the skids, this wasn't the most elegant address either. My apartment was 1/4 of a subdivided bungalow that contained 4 separate units, each with a private entrance. The structure was being sold, and the randy real estate agent who was showing the property liked to unexpectedly rap on my door. Since I was the only tenant at home in the afternoon, when he had time to kill between showings, he'd come over and flirt. I would pretend to be on the phone or make up excuses through my screen door to get rid of him, but one day I was bored and he was being somewhat charming, so I let him in. By this point, I had an entire wall devoted to my star, 5 rows of 10 photos, each a different shot of Lizabeth Scott, some color, some black and white, all fabulous. In all sincerity, he said to me, I can tell you feel the same way about her as I do about Madonna. Back then, everyone loved Madonna, and I gleefully concurred. He asked me what I knew about Lizabeth, and I explained that she was alive and lived in a residential stretch of Hollywood Boulevard, but I had no idea where. Leave it to me. He picked up the phone and called a friend of his who was a title officer. He whispered, "What's her name again?" He repeated the name to his friend over the phone, and I could hear her say, "Nope, no Elizabeth Scott on Hollywood Boulevard." I was shaking my head frantically, so he handed the receiver to me. I corrected, "No, not Elizabeth Scott, Lizabeth Scott." "Nope, no Lizbeth Scott." No, think Elizabeth, but with no E. Elizabeth, L-I-Z. She cut me off with the gold I was looking for. 8277 Hollywood Boulevard. Dark clouds overhead parted and the sun came streaming through. I thanked her vociferously and started jumping up and down for joy. The guy could tell me it made me exceedingly happy and didn't mind when I hurriedly escorted him to the door and sent him on his way. I whipped out the Thomas Guide and went to work. Required text for every Angelino with a car. The Thomas Guide is a detailed map book of Los Angeles and the way we could find an address before GPS and Google Maps. It revealed to me for the first time that Hollywood Boulevard extended beyond Crescent Heights, where I thought it petered out. Nay, it travels on and winds through the hills above Sunset Boulevard. I put on my Stan Smiths and hit the road with a light spring in my stride. Sure enough, right below the iconic mid-century architectural landmark, Pierre Koenig's Case Study House number 22, and just up behind the Chateau Marmont, stands 8277 Hollywood Boulevard. I'd seen publicity photos of Lizabeth and her sister Justine on the property and recognized it immediately. It looked exactly the same, but it was a house, a freestanding structure in the glamorous Hollywood Hills, not an apartment on a major boulevard. It made me wonder how many goose chases I had been on based on whatever printed details I had. There she had been the whole time, since the late 40s, in fact. I was so excited I could barely breathe. I managed to draw in some air and continued back home with new hope for a greater life. I loved walking around New York, and I likewise loved walking around Hollywood. I worked at night and had my days free, so it was an educational and economic time filler. This became my afternoon ritual for the next several months. Every day around noon, I would take a leisurely 2-hour stroll from my abode at the corner of Poinsettia Place and Willoughby Avenue, past her house and back. Never did I see anything of note in my passing until one warm autumn day. The house was atop a sloped property that this quiet part of Hollywood Boulevard curves around, protected by an imposing wrought iron fence and an ivy-covered slope. As I rounded the corner, I saw that her garage door was up. I slowed my pace and tried not to scream as I saw Elizabeth Scott in the flesh for the first time. It was unmistakably her from a great distance, the long blonde hair, puffing on what looked like a big white cigarette. She pulled the garage door down, but not before I caught a glimpse of, yes, her Jaguar. As foretold, it was indeed dark forest green. She seemed frail, with the gait of an older lady who almost lurched back to her front door while exhaling an opaque cloud of white smoke. I realized I had stopped walking and was motionless, staring through the rungs of the driveway gate. Thank God she didn't look over to see me. She might have thought I was insane. I couldn't wait to tell someone I found her, but who and to what end? Practically everyone I had ever encountered was asked if they'd heard of Lizabeth Scott. Occasionally, someone had. A customer at work once corroborated that yes, she shopped at Quinn's Market and yes, she drove a Jaguar, but most people just looked blank. This had all been so exciting, but what did it mean? That I had successfully stalked the object of my fixation? That I was crazy? That I had gone too far? I caught Lauren Bacall on a talk show at some point, going on about how she didn't feel she owed anything to her fans, clearly. But how did Lizabeth Scott feel? Celebrity stalkers had become a thing in tabloid culture, and I was far too much in love to be caught in such a ridiculous position. I'd hate to meet her for the first time when she came down to identify me at the station for being a peeping Todd. I was so curious about this woman, I could scarcely control myself. I wanted to know everything about her so badly. How was I to know that her life had been both a veritable fairy tale and the story of a woman who didn't feel threatened by the rules? A woman who made her own luck and an actress whose on-screen career embodied the collective trajectory of contemporary American women, with the inevitable outcome of becoming a noir heroine / vixen. I'd have given my right pinky to know her backstory.
Great. Such great details and like a blast from the past from a different time. Like is Quinn's Market still around?
No, no,
Thomas guides,
right,
not being able to find where celebrities live easily.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so funny because I never thought to look on the Thomas Guide that Hollywood Boulevard would continue. But do you remember you'd get the address and it would give you a little grid, basically? It would be like
Yeah.
A5, C7, and you'd go, oh, I didn't know that existed.
So cool. So, I was thinking you could also read the part about how you met Lizabeth for the first time and how that
Yes,
happened.
of course. So I wrote her a letter because I did have her address. And I stopped walking by her house because I moved to Silver Lake and it wasn't geographically possible to walk by her house every day. But I finally sent her a letter when I was out of work asking her if she would want to collaborate on a biography. And she wrote me back a very nice letter and said, I don't feel worthy of such adulation. But I wrote her back and then she wrote me back and we kept writing back and forth. And then I got a job at the American Film Institute, and I think that made her take me a little more seriously. And then she asked me, her secretary called me and asked me, told me that Lizabeth wanted to have lunch with me at Musso and Frank. So this is the chapter about our first meeting and our first of many lunches at Musso and Frank. And then her favorite restaurant switched to Cape Mantilini, which has also gone down on Wilshire and Doheny. So they were part of the Hamburger Hamlet chain, which another great Los Angeles thing that's gone.
Yeah.
So this chapter is called Musso and Frank. 12:45 seemed like a peculiar time to meet. Why not 12:30 or 1 p.m.? It made no difference to me. The big day had arrived. Valentine's Day, no less. After 13 years of intense obsession, on February 14th, I was going to meet her face to face. I was so nervous when I walked down Hollywood Boulevard from our office to the restaurant, looking at the Hollywood Walk of Fame stars beneath my feet. I thought about the Kinks song, Celluloid Heroes, and wrapping my head around meeting one of those luminaries commemorated in the sidewalk. A big idea to get used to. Her star was further down the boulevard, outside the 1923 Taft building, at 1624 Vine Street. Now it falls in the driveway of a Trader Joe's that was added in 2010. A small reminder that the changing face of Hollywood no longer resembled the playground of the stars and was starting to look and feel like any other big city. Having offices on Hollywood Boulevard at the time was not as glamorous as it might sound. The corner of Hollywood and Las Palmas, where we were, was featured in the movie Pretty Woman as a place where hookers dwell. In reality, it was a biker hangout. And the bikers were nice enough, but their motorcycles made an awful racket. Eating out was a challenge as dining choices were very limited. One of my favorite restaurants in Hollywood was called Nicodel. It was an old school steakhouse with red leather booths about 2 miles away on Melrose. Dark and quiet, their menu had a gorgeous baseball steak that was the perfect price for an aspiring aspirant. It also had a very popular vegetarian platter that came with fish and mashed potatoes covered in chicken gravy. There was this big telephone in the middle of the restaurant with an original sign that read, "Lot Phone." The building had a fabulous 50s neon sign in front and was smack dab between the Paramount lot and the former RKO lot. I would always imagine Veronica Lake getting tipsy and calling the studio from there to say she was done for the day. You could eat in the bar, which was lined with black velvet paintings of nude women with astounding breasts. If you were there at 10:50 p.m., you would often see anchorman Jerry Dunphy downing a scotch before walking next door, where the local TV station, KTLA Channel 5, had their studio in a converted RKO building. He would appear on the TV in the bar at 11 o'clock on the dot to deliver the nightly news. Since Lizabeth was a Paramount pretty, I'd always imagined meeting her there. But this magnificent landmark had been demolished 4 years earlier to make way for the parking lot that currently occupies the real estate. Our reservation was at the legendary Musso and Frank Grill, the oldest restaurant in Hollywood, which since has come back into vogue, but in the late 90s was tarnished, unpopular, and at the risk of following in the footsteps of Nicodel. I couldn't think of a more appropriate choice to meet a movie star and appreciated her traditional selection, even though long past its glory. I'm meeting Lizabeth Scott. She made a reservation for 12:45. The maitre d' disguised how impressed he was and simply escorted me to a booth, sitting me down alone in the cavernous main dining room against the back wall by the kitchen. The anticipation was killing me. What was she going to look like? Would I recognize her? What would she be wearing? She entered the room and followed the maitre d' to me. I had worn a suit and sat rigid as the petite woman approached the table. Todd, I'm Lizabeth Scott. Before I could say anything, she tugged the maitre d's sleeve. Surely you can do better than this. This place is empty. Why don't we take that table over there? She pointed to the most visible booth to and from the entrance at the foot of the famous bar. The maitre d' acquiesced, and I scooted out of my booth to follow them. She was spry. This gave me a better chance to size her up. She was more than a head shorter than me, despite being elevated in her high heels. She had on skin-tight designer blue jeans and a short, tightly fitted leather jacket. Sprouting from her tiny head was a luxurious mane of beautiful blonde hair. From behind, she looked like she was 25 years old. We got to the table, and when she turned around to shake my hand, the youthful backside was a sharp contrast to the front. She still had fine, delicate features, but her white complexion appeared transparent, barely covering the veins beneath. For a nanosecond, I thought she looked like a 75-year-old. She ignited when she turned on a dazzling smile, and her hazel eyes started to sparkle. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and her voice was higher than I would have imagined, but full of resonance. She was ageless. What a pleasure to finally meet you, Todd. I've been looking forward to this. She was. My smile could only match hers. We sat opposite each other at the booth and stared in amazement at the other's face. Tell me the truth. If you had passed me on the street, would you have recognized me? I was on the spot and quickly studied her face. The most recent photo of her I had located was in the Hollywood Reporter Society pages when she attended an opening at the Los Angeles County Museum 15 years ago? To be honest, I would have no idea. I smiled broadly and said, "Of course I would." Ha 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 ha. What was it that Norma Desmond said? I loved it, that laugh. I grew addicted to it over the years, but was hooked from the first time she shared it with me. And already we are referencing old Hollywood. I relaxed and shot back. I'm ready for my close up, Mr. DeMille. No, no, no. Bzz, wrong answer. I quickly thought for another and pulled out, "We had faces then?" Yes, we had faces then. Jackpot. Not only did I get the answer right, but she also launched into her best glorious Swanson as she did it. Two elderly gentlemen were passing our table at that moment, gawking at her. They knew she was someone, but were not sure who. She noticed and surprised them by bugging out her eyes with a startled expression, which made them jump and move along. Oh, Todd, I believe in fate. Do you? Absolutely. She was enchanting. Her long fingers were covered with exotic rings that she loved to gesticulate with, yet her hands revealed the telltale sign of her true age. So tell me, Todd, why me? Of all the actors in Hollywood, why Lizabeth Scott? What drew you to me? Not too late for tears, I hope. I was floored and flattered that she remembered a detail from my first letter, that I had done a remake of Too Late for Tears, one of my favorite films in her repertoire. I would later discover that she hated the film because the femme fatale she plays is one of the most amoral and ruthless in the archives of film noir. I can't remember how many people she killed to steal a fortune. I reminded her that I became smitten with her in Dead Reckoning opposite Humphrey Bogart. I stammered, "You know that first scene where you see your face and you look so amazing, so beautiful, and your hair is so, you know." She gave me a sultry look that made me feel funny and slowly drawled, "In other words, sheer physical beauty." I guess she found it a reasonable answer to her question. "Are you going to have a drink?" Was this an invitation? Would we end up drinking together in the afternoon like she did with Dick Powell and Pitfall and wind up drunk and crying on each other's shoulder? I had to go back to work, so I opted for an iced tea. She was disappointed. I had a drink once when I was 18, scotch. It made me disgustingly ill, and I never touched the stuff again. I heard her repeat a variation of this story later, but with a different scenario involving her first meeting with Luella Parsons, but I'm getting ahead of myself. She asked me if I smoked, which I did. "Oh, Todd, you must quit. I quit last year and I feel so much better." And it went on from there. But
I love your impression.
I tried, she had a very strange accent, and she was from Scranton, Pennsylvania, but her parents made her take elocution. So I think they call it mid-Atlantic. It's what, Katharine Hepburn and
Oh,
kind of that mysterious Hollywood accent. But
interesting.
but it was fabulous. It was fascinating.
Definitely. So as you point out in the book, most of the films Elizabeth Scott is remembered for are in the film noir genre. Um, and I know just tons of people who are just absolutely gaga for film noir. And sometimes I wonder what draws them in particular to that genre. Is it seeing the gritty side of American cities in the past? Is it the femme fatale and tough guy tropes? Or is it just the cinematography? What do you think it is for you?
Well, certainly all of those. I mean, the cinematography is certainly one of the most arresting things about film noir. And when I took a film noir course in college, and we were watching these 35 millimeter prints of things like Out of the Past, and it really, the great John Alton and, all the great noir cinematographers, James Wong Howe, the black and white, the work is just so amazing. But I think what Lizabeth said, she was unaware that they were film noir when they were making them. She
That was
only
really
heard that
surprising.
term in the early 70s when she went to speak at UC Santa Barbara, I think, and they brought it up. And she said, well, that's so interesting because something about movies, they were starting to explore psychological aspects of characters, where I think, not so much thought was given to the psychological makeup of characters. It was usually like boys and girls, pretty, right? They meet each other, they have very white people problems. But now you have all these people returning from World War II and finding an America that's very unsympathetic. And, it's very difficult to make ends meet. And so many good people start getting lured into the dark side and contemplating ways to, make their life work, but resorting to things that are not socially acceptable. So I think to audiences at the time, it was a breath of fresh air that realism was entering the cinema. Also, they started moving out of the studios and into the streets and showing people, the dark city, the real urban grit. Um, and noir ranges the gamut. I mean, you have noir westerns, you have technicolor noirs. Lizabeth was in a beautiful Baroque film called Desert Fury, and it's in technicolor, but it's just one of the most, just the sense of dread from the opening chords of Milos Rocha's score. So I don't know. There's a lot to love about it.
For me, it's the voiceover narration.
Right,
Any
the
movie with
voiceover.
voiceover narration is gets me. No, I'm
I mean, there were so many innovations. Like one of my favorite voiceovers is Sunset Boulevard, where it begins with William Holden floating face down in the pool, and he's narrating from beyond the grave.
Right.
Right. That's so awesome.
So yeah. So before I read the book, excuse me, I guess the only Elizabeth Scott movie I had seen as a kid was Scared Stiff, which I can't remember, but I know I love because I love Martin and Lewis. But since I read the book, I did go back and and watched Too Late for Tears. I watched Dead Reckoning, the one with Humphrey Bogart, Dark City, and The Strange Love of Martha Ivers. So gosh, I love Too Late for Tears. I thought she was super ruthless, ice cold, and I was like surprisingly sort of rooting for her to get away with everything, which
Well, that's
wasn't
why
going to happen.
that's why she's so fabulous, because especially in that film, she takes everyone out, and you're like, go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
you
unlike
shouldn't be feeling
many,
this.
I mean, what's wonderful is she's just so suffocating in that bourgeois life she's living with her husband, who's barely able to, afford the Chateau Michel. And, she wants the fine life. But at the end, she ends up in Mexico, right? With a handsome Latin boyfriend and beautiful clothes. So I love that film too, because she had a purpose, right? She killed all these people and she didn't feel remorseful. She took the money and she went and had a ball.
Actually, she was doing something with it.
Yeah. But of course, she gets her comeuppance.
I enjoyed Dead Reckoning a lot. I thought she was like super beautiful in that movie, and like every time she had tears on her face, she was like glittering.
Well, that's where Humphrey Bogart sums her up very well. He calls her Cinderella with a husky voice. And just
ahead.
interesting about that film, Dead Reckoning, it was to be Rita Hayworth's follow-up to Gilda. Gilda was an international success, so they thought, let's team Rita Hayworth with Humphrey Bogart. And they borrowed Humphrey Bogart, but Rita Hayworth had met Orson Welles, and he had cut her hair and bleached it blonde, and they were about to make Lady from Shanghai. So she dropped out.
Wow,
It was
interesting.
Lizabeth's third film, but she was loaned out by Hal Wallace Productions at Paramount. And, it's a pretty big A picture, right? Glossy Hollywood. So it's wonderful that she got that kind of treatment. And she really is just stunning. in the film.
Yeah, I like it. It kind of hits all the nails that you want in a noir. It's like people drugging people and them passing
Right.
out, and
The smell
um,
of jasmine in the air.
right.
And in that one too, she is pretty ruthless as well. So, which is the big surprise, right?
Yeah, yeah. So are there any other Elizabeth roles that you think are kind of like don't miss it?
Well, I think her greatest achievement as an actress is a film called Pitfall from 1948 with Dick Powell and Raymond Burr. And she plays, it's just a very, she plays a good girl who just keeps hooking up with the wrong guys and, pays the price. It's very misogynistic. It's very interesting that, just to see how tough it was for women back then because they really were seen as objects, right? And Raymond Burr plays this horrible stalker. And instead of just calling the police, she's nice to him. And she has an affair with a married man and is ready to give it all up for him. But of course, the married man, right, doesn't want to betray his loyalty to his wife. And then, she's got a boyfriend she's waiting for to get out of jail because he stole all this stuff for her. Um, but it's directed by Andre de Toth, who was married to Veronica Lake. But
Oh,
it's a beautiful movie, very well written. And as Lizabeth said, they did a lot of improv. So it caught, I think her acting is heightened by that she didn't have time to study too much. So they were all just coming off the cuff. And it's very realistic. There's a scene where the seduction scene with her and Dick Powell is like nothing I had seen in a Hollywood movie up until then. It's very
hmm.
sexy.
Gotta check it out.
And then, of course, you mentioned Scared Stiff. She did do that comedy with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. And I always regretted that she didn't get more comic roles because she really
Mm.
loved it. And I know the one movie I believe I saw her in, but didn't realize it was hers. She was in Elvis Presley's second movie, Loving You.
Oh, it's second movie. Wow.
Yeah. And she was, she loved Elvis.
Cool.
And that was her last Hollywood film,
Oh, wow.
1957.
So, in the book, you talk about how Lizabeth Scott was under contract to the famous married producer Hal Wallace at Paramount
Mhm.
Pictures. He had
Yes.
produced Casablanca and dozens or maybe even scores of films. And she admittedly was his mistress for many years. Um, though we don't know exactly we don't exactly know Elizabeth's entire relationship with Hal Wallace. To me, it sounds kind of like a casting couch situation where she was very young, um, but it provided her with a lot of amazing opportunities at a young age, but at the cost of being under a powerful producer's thumb for years. With all the dirt that has surfaced during the Me Too movement, frankly, it doesn't seem like a lot has changed. Uh, what is your sense of, sexual harassment and these types of coercive relationships?
Well, Shirley MacLaine was discovered by Hal Wallace as well
Oh.
in a very similar circumstance. Elizabeth was the understudy for Tallulah Bankhead in a production of Skin of Our Teeth on Broadway with Frederick March and Montgomery Clift. But Tallulah left the play, and then Miriam Hopkins took over, and Elizabeth was able to go on for her one night when Hal Wallace was in the audience. Shirley MacLaine was in a Broadway show called The Pajama Game, and Carol Haney, the lead, stepped out the night Hal Wallace came and saw Shirley in the lead and signed her immediately.
Wow.
Now, interestingly enough, Shirley wrote in a book later on that Hal Me Too'd her. She was already a star. She'd already been nominated for an Academy Award, and she was filming Can Can with Frank Sinatra. And she said one day Hal just came out and he must have been drunk and just pinned her against a car and stuck his tongue down her throat. And she was horrified.
Ugh.
Elizabeth, I believe they fell in love. She was the first player he put under contract, quickly followed by Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Charlton Heston, right? Huge stars. So it wasn't like I think she slept with him to get the part. I think she got the part, but definitely fell in love with him. And he was a great mentor. And I think he had promised her that he would leave his wife at some point and marry her. So, it is interesting and complicated. I find her very admirable that she was able to navigate because she'd been dealing with producers now for years. And, she had a romantic relationship with one of the producers of Skin of Our Teeth and became the understudy. So I'm not saying she used her feminine wiles to get ahead, but she certainly was not afraid of them. And the fact that she and Hal were friends till the end, I think validates that they had something, it was more than a casting couch situation. I think they really were in love. And if you look at her in those early films, sometimes she has this look of just joy and ecstasy. And I've heard that that's often when Hal Wallace is standing off camera. And, her co-stars were not thrilled and they gave her a hard time. Burt Lancaster writes, she was the producer's girlfriend and she was also madly in love with Burt Lancaster because she thought he was so beautiful. And Hal Wallace was teaming them to be a romantic screen team. So they were in Desert Fury together, then I Walk Alone. But then Burt Lancaster said, I will not be in another Lizabeth Scott film, and got out of his contract. And Charlton Heston was kind of the same way. So I think she said she never was treated with disrespect ever. She never had any Me Too's with any other people in Hollywood. Maybe she did, but she didn't tell me. But, she navigated it very well. And then when Hal, they said, let's end this romantic thing and stay friends, his wife died in 1966, and then he married a younger actress. And I think Lizabeth was kind of pissed, but, he took care of her. He gave her a wonderful career and made her financially independent, managed her money and left her very rich. So, as she said at our first meeting, good thing I'm rich. I don't know what I'd do if I had to work for a living.
Let's see. Next thing I wanted to ask about was, could you talk about her connections and your connections to the LGBTQ community and the tabloid rumors about Lizabeth Scott that claimed she was a lesbian?
So when I first started doing my scavenger hunt looking for information about her, I found this book called The Paramount Pretties by James Robert Parrish. And in it, he devotes some ink to, there was a magazine in the 50s called Confidential. So it was like the Inquirer, it's one of these scandal rags. And they came out with this story that, the Hollywood vice cops raided the prostitute's lair and their jaws dropped when they picked up their little black book and got to the S's. But basically insinuated that Lizabeth was a lesbian who used prostitutes in Hollywood. And, she, they made accusations on Marlena Dietrich, many people. Anyway, she was pissed. And there was a lawyer named Jerry Geisler. And Robert Mitchum had a story, and Doris Duke. So they all got together, and Jerry Geisler said, let's sue them. So she was part of a lawsuit to sue Confidential. The case was thrown out of court because it was filed in California and the magazine was out of New York. Some technicality. But, she would have done better to do like Marlene Dietrich and just ignore it instead of bringing more attention to it. However, when it was presented to me in this book from the 70s, it was presented that she was a lesbian, that she had been outed and filed this lawsuit and lost, which proved it. So, I just was under the impression that she was gay. And then that rumor has been propagated over and over. And if you pick up many books on queer cinema, you will find Lizabeth Scott mentioned. And so when I had lunch with her, I was ready to say, I think it's so cool that we're both gay, but something stopped me. And I never got there with her. And then as I got to know her better, she was not gay at all. In fact, far from it. She had many boyfriends, and while not homophobic, she had many gay friends too. She just wasn't gay. So it's interesting that rumor plagued her. And it when we did the very first film noir film festival at the American Cinematheque in 1999, and I met a guy named Eddie Muller, and he was putting it together, and he'd just written a book called Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, and Lizabeth was on the cover with Humphrey Bogart. And in the book, he says, well, and Lizabeth preferred, preferred the feminine spice between the sheets, calling her out as a lesbian. And when the film festival came up, they were going to show Desert Fury, and he said, will you see if Lizabeth will come? And I said, of course. And Elizabeth eventually agreed to come to the theater as long as Eddie Muller wasn't in the building. And so, if someone called her a lesbian, she was not happy. And then later, a book came out called Crime Wave by James Elroy, where she is a character in the book, loin lapping Lizzie Scott, and, hanging out with rapacious diesel dykes. And it devastated her. And she became a recluse for a year. She was so embarrassed, and she actually tried to file a lawsuit against James Elroy. But the lawyers came back and said, calling someone gay in this day and age is not grounds for slander. And your career can't be affected because your career is kind of in the past. So it was very hard for her to know that many people thought she was a lesbian. She never understood it. And, and then as I got to know her, I was like, it's weird because people will still argue with me, like, of course she's a lesbian. It's like, well, I knew her for 20 years. And I out her in this book as a heterosexual Republican. And, what can you do? But it's a very odd thing that even, most people think she's a lesbian.
Lots of light here. So back to sort of some lighter questions. So let me name some iconic actors that Lizabeth worked with, and maybe you could tell us, to your best recollection, how she regarded them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Robert Mitchum.
She loved Robert Mitchum. I love Robert Mitchum, so that was something we had in common. And it was funny because our first meeting, I asked her about Robert Mitchum, and she said, oh, Todd, he'd come by my dressing room with his guitar and serenade me. Damn, he was sexy. So, right from the beginning, I was like, wow, she seems pretty sincere in her attraction towards men. But when I met her, it was right around when Robert Mitchum died. And I know she was very upset because she was a huge fan of his as well. But she said he was just wonderful, great guy to work with. They made one film together called The Racket.
All right.
But I suspected.
All right, Burt Lancaster.
So Burt, she loved Burt Lancaster and thought he was beautiful and had a crush on him. And but as I was saying, Burt Lancaster was not so nice to her and just kind of wrote her off as the producer's girlfriend and didn't take her seriously as an actress or a coworker. So, but she did love him and tried to stay friends with him, but they had very opposite political views, very opposing political views. So I know in the later years there was definitely a schism between them over politics.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Lucille Ball.
So she made one movie with Lucille Ball in 1949 at RKO called Easy Living. And Lizabeth, it's with Victor Mature. And so Lizabeth is the terrible wife and Lucy is the wonderful secretary. So they actually have no scenes together. And I did ask her about it. And she said, she met her. And it was before she was I Love Lucy. And she always admired her. But she said, she was very nice, but they didn't really have much of a relationship.
Humphrey Bogart.
So she loved Humphrey Bogart. She called him Bogey. And she said she loved him a lot because it was her third film. And by that time, he was king of Hollywood. So he didn't show up until about 10 a.m. on the set. And she said, and then he would start to learn his lines.
Wow.
So they would never get anything done. And then they'd break for lunch and he'd have a martini. And then after lunch, they would get the shot off. And then he was done at 4:30. So she said it was great for her because she, was always super prepared and working at that pace was very relaxing. And she felt very confident to be with him because he could call the shots. So she said it was a very pleasant set. Her director was John Cromwell, who she was not as fond of. They worked together many times. But she loved Bogey. And the funny thing is, she follows in Lauren Bacall's footsteps. Both of them are kind of discovered by Diana Vreeland, of all people. And she puts them in the magazine, Harper's Bazaar, and Lauren gets the call and comes to Hollywood, and then Elizabeth gets the call the next year. And but in all of our time together, I don't ever remember discussing Lauren Bacall. But Bogey, she loved, and she felt very, she was a fan of his when she was a little girl. So it was a big thrill for her to be in a movie with him.
All right. Dean Martin.
She loved Dean Martin. She did not love Jerry Lewis. So she said Dean Martin was just a lot of fun and very sexy. And they played a romantic, they were the romantic couple in the film. And she enjoyed that very much. But she didn't dislike Jerry Lewis. She just thought he had quite an ego. And said Dean was just so wonderful to work with. And Jerry was a little more, took a little more effort. Right. And then she wasn't a fan of his comedy.
All right, last person, Elvis Presley.
Well, Elvis, she told me, oh, when we do our close-ups, I'd lose myself in his eyes. Rumor has it that she would screw up takes with him, so she'd have to do them over. And I think, by that time, she and Hal were seeing other people. So, it's funny because he does kiss her in the film, even though I think she's in her 30s or 40s and he's, a young kid. But she said he was so innocent and such a gentleman and so nice. And she said Colonel Parker was there and he had this entourage and Colonel Parker just didn't let him out of his sight. And, he was definitely under the thumb of him. And she felt bad for him because he was young and just such a gentleman and so gracious and kind to everyone, including Colonel Parker. But she said physically he was just stunning. He was just beautiful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think messing up your take to get extra kisses it's a nice trick.
Right. But it's interesting because I kissed her a couple times, and you just think of all the lips that her lips have touched, right? It was like, oh my God. Even Mary Astor, she kisses on the lips in Desert Fury.
Oh,
So,
cool.
but she kissed some Hollywood legends.
Oh. So you've made a number of documentaries in the past few years with your husband, P. David Ebersole,
Hmm.
including House of Cardin about designer Pierre Cardin, Hit So Hard about Patty Schemmel, the drummer of the band Hole, Mansfield 6667 about Jane Mansfield's relationship with the Satanist Anton LaVey. And your last film, My Name is Lopez, is about Trini Lopez, one of the first Latino rock stars.
Hmm.
What other projects are you currently working on?
Well, it was so fun to take a break from filmmaking and write a book, because filmmaking is a wonderful collaborative process and you work with many people, but it's so expensive. And, it was just such a joy to be able to sit down with a computer, and that's all you need. And, I had to discipline myself to write the book. But once it was done, it was just so satisfying, and it was so nice to have that autonomy and creative freedom. So we moved to Mexico recently from Palm Springs with the intention, me and P. David, of writing books.
Mm.
But of course, whenever we say we're done with Hollywood, someone comes knocking at the door. So we have a couple fun projects in the works. I don't think I can say what they are yet because they're not set in stone. But yes, we do have like 3 documentary projects that we're currently out pitching, all really cool pop culture things.
Very
So,
cool.
and
Yeah,
we made the documentary with Cher
right.
10 years ago about her mother who just died
Oh,
last
right.
week at 98 years old. So that was
Mm.
so lucky that we got to work with them. And of note, interesting, Pierre Cardin and Lizabeth Scott were born the same year. So both of them turned 100 this year.
Oh,
And
wow.
my book came out on her 100th birthday on September 29th,
Oh, cool.
which was very meaningful to me.
Sweet. I guess I'd like to open it up. If anybody watching would like to ask a question, please put it in the chat. See if there's anything.
Oh, wow.
So, anybody have any questions? And I just wanted to, say,
Oh,
if
thanks for the
anybody,
nice comments, people.
oh yeah, if anyone would like to be eligible to receive one of the copies of Lunch with Lizabeth published by Pelicanesis, we've been flashing the email address, but please send an email to ecdept@lapl.org. And I believe they put that email address in the chat as well. Lots of nice comments coming through here. Can't wait to read the book.
It's been very fun. People, of course, shared their Elizabeth stories with me. And it's just so nice. You rubbed people the right way.
Mm.
I have a friend whose mother worked at a department store, and Elizabeth was a regular customer.
Oh.
And just nice to hear that she was gracious to people, and right, she was never imperious or.
So, Krista asks, what did Lizabeth think of Barbara Stanwyck?
She also was so in awe that she was working with Barbara Stanwyck in her second film. And they only have one scene together, but it's a good one. And very sapphic, as a matter of fact, which is ironic. But, Barbara Stanwyck also was a little miffed that Lizabeth got billing above the title. So it was Van Heflin, Barbara Stanwyck, and Lizabeth Scott. And she actually served Hal Wallace with papers saying, you must remove your girlfriend's name from above the title. She is not the same stature as me and Van Heflin. And Hal Wallace said, I can do whatever I want. And so kept her there. But in the later years, they did meet at Chasen's. Lizabeth told me they ran into each other at Chasen's, and she was so thrilled that Barbara remembered her.
Oh,
Barbara came up to her, and she said they had a warm hug and talked about, how great that movie is and how it's lived on. But
yeah, The Strange Love of
of
Martha
Martha Ivers, yeah.
Ivers is really excellent. Another question. Someone asks, did Lizabeth enjoy watching movies later in life? Which ones did she like?
Yes, she did. She was an active member of the Academy. So when I met her, she showed me her Academy membership card. She was very proud of that. So she voted on all the Oscar films, and she went to the Academy Theater down on Wilshire. And just randomly, I remember one year, I was very curious who she was voting for. And it was the year Gwyneth Paltrow won for Shakespeare in Love. And she was in love with the movie called Central Station. I don't know if anyone remembers this. So she loved that Espanol Fernanda Montenegro. That's who she voted for Best Actress. I said, you didn't vote for Gwyneth Paltrow? She went, God, no. But she did. She loved new movies, and she watched a lot of new movies. But she did come to the screening of Desert Fury, and she was very. I know a lot of celebrities hate looking at themselves, but she really enjoyed it, and enjoyed most of her films.
Let's see. Scott Miller asks, what is one of the most intelligent celebrities you met?
Oh, wow.
Or a great conversation with?
Well, Lizabeth, for sure. I could talk to her about anything. She knew about everything. She knew who Mary Shearer was. I said, I have a friend, Mary Shearer. She said, oh, no, her. She's on Mad TV, Fox Saturdays at 11. I'm like, wow. But one of the smartest people I've ever met is Tilda Swinton. Just completely different. But she also is just a brilliant person with an incredible memory, and she can remember everybody's name, which always impresses me so much. But Lizabeth was, we never ran out of things to talk about. And no, even when I'd bring up like Anton LaVey in the Church of Satan, and she'd be like, yes, of course I remember him. And I'm like, nothing was off limits. So
let's see. So Carrie asks, what did Lizabeth do in her free time when she wasn't having lunch with you?
Well, one of the secrets to her longevity and beauty was she was very disciplined, and she exercised 3 times a week. So I know she did aerobic dance, and she did Pilates. She was very devoted. She loved her fans, and she answered all of her fan mail personally. And she had a huge social circle, and she had friends all over the world. So I know people were always coming into town, and they'd often stay with her. She had friends from India that would come and stay with her. But I don't remember her she collected glass animals. She had a glass menagerie that she was very proud of, and she had about 100 crystal animals. She collected art. She had a Picasso and a few Grandma Moseses she was very proud of. She had one movie poster at her house for one of her films over her washer and dryer. But she was just very social. She had a lot of men friends, a lot of gay friends that would take her out. And so she went to a lot of parties, and she loved to shop. She loved to bias presence.
Yeah, that was a funny part of the book where she said, people keep asking me what my hobbies are, so I'm just going to say them. I collect
Right,
a
she
lot of
made
animals.
one up, yeah, but then
Yeah.
it stuck with her, and she did actually. She also had a collection of miniature high-heeled shoes, which was very cool that we made a couple contributions to.
Nice. Let's see. Benjamin Meisner asks, did Lizabeth regret she wasn't offered a certain part in a movie she would have liked to play?
That's a good question. Hello, Benjamin in Germany. I signed your book last night at Book Soup. I know that the film I Walk Alone was to be a vehicle for Christine Miller, who was also under contract to Hal Wallace and appeared in Too Late for Tears and Desert Fury with Lizabeth. But Lizabeth decided she wanted to play the role. And so Hal Wallace took out Christine and put in Lizabeth. So, and as Christine said, Lizabeth got what Lizabeth wanted. But I'm trying to think.
Was that the sister in Too Late for Tears? There's the sister of the
Yes,
husband? Wow.
yes.
I thought I saw her for a second in Dark City as well, for a flash at the beginning on the street.
She
But
might have been.
yeah.
I'll check that. In Desert Fury, she has one line. But I don't know. She played a part called Anna Lucasta on the stage. She did theater work in the 70s, and I know she was interested in some stage roles. But that's a really good question. I don't think she ever told me there was a part she really wanted but didn't get. She said she regrets that she wasn't offered more comedies because she would have liked to have done more of that.
Well,
And
so,
she did have her favorite of her own films.
Oh, yes.
Was her very first film, You Came Along, 1945. It was written by Ayn Rand and directed by John Farrow, who was Mia Farrow's father. And if you watch that movie, it's not on home video, but it is on YouTube and things. But that's her first movie. It says introducing a new screen personality, Lizabeth Scott, and that is her. When I see that movie, that is the most like her in real life. That is the closest to her personal character. But she always loved that. And her other favorite of her films was Scared Stiff.
Oh, cool.
Strangely enough.
I just wanted to point out, so the LA Public Library does have some of her movies in the popular library in Central Library, and some of the branches have some of her movies. So I checked out one of our DVDs, Dark City, the other day from Central. Oh, another question. Lizabeth recorded some songs.
Yes.
Did she follow a career did she have a career in singing?
Well, she made the one album in 1957 called Lizabeth. And I mean, as I say in the book, I think it's brilliant. And she has an incredible singing voice, very unique, very beautiful. And she debuted the album on television on the Patti Page show, where she did lip sync, but then she sang live on TV. So she had it in her. It's funny because in all her movies, she played nightclub singers in at least 5 movies, and they dubbed her. She sings in her first movie, You Came Along, just a few bars, but I don't know why, because her voice was incredible. And when I met her, one of the first things I asked was, did you do any more recording? And she was like, oh, no. So I think it was something on her bucket list that she wanted to do, but then didn't follow up with it. And it's too bad because she really was talented. I know she had some plans. There were some Broadway shows in the work that never panned out. And I think one of them was replacing Lauren Bacall in Applause, which was a musical. So, but there were no secret recordings or additional recordings. I was very disappointed. And I asked her if she would sing again. She was like, never. Of course, I met her when she was 75.
I remember Applause. My high school orchestra, we were going to do that as our musical, but then it
Oh,
fell
really?
through. Yeah. Well,
it's interesting when you look at clips of that now. That was Lauren Bacall, but early lip syncing, they had pre-recorded the whole thing because she was it's a lot of work for someone with that, especially with these cigarette smokers with their scratchy voices.
Let's see. So I guess if there's no more questions, so thanks so much for visiting with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Stella.
And I want to talk more, but offline.
Okay.
I look forward to reading your next book and seeing your next film, which I'm sure there will be one.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us today, and have a great holiday season.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.